Now we're going to go over dryland strategies. So a little quote from Bill Mollison. The development of conservation strategies for the preservation of dryland species and for the responsible human use and management of arid land is probably the world's most pressing problem in landscape management. So of all of the sections that Bill went over, he said if we really look at where, say, poorer people that are suffering due to agricultural things, not having enough food, malnutrition, where they're located and where these populations are, they're typically what's classified as drylands. So as a permaculture designer taking on more of a humanitarian role, if we are able to help in these places to provide better agricultural conditions, that's going to be one of the most pressing things that we can do, or how would we work. So all of the climates, this seems to be the one that's the most critical. So drylands, they represent 41% of our Earth's land, and they supply food for over 2 billion people. So that's quite a large area. So this is a very difficult climate, supplying food for lots of people. The ecosystem that's developed in dry lands is classified by the ratio of annual precipitation to annual, what's called evapotranspiration. So what does that mean? It evaporates more than it rains. So therefore, it's dry. If you have more rainfall than evaporation, like here in the tropics when it's raining right now, there's more rain that comes than evaporated during the day. So it's wet. The ground is wet. It's very humid. But in these conditions, they get more evaporation through sun evaporation than rainfall in one annual. So there's more evaporation. So they are classified into different regions of semi-arid, which is like steppe, scrubs, or low forest vegetation, arid, or deserts, mainly just sand. So we can see those different classifications. They have characteristics meaning like erratic rainfall. You can't really predict when it's going to rain, which is very difficult for rain-fed agriculture. When it does rain, they typically have very large rainfall events. So heavy showers, and then most of that water, since there's very low vegetation, runs off, and they have flooding. So in each year, if you go around all the deserts, there's more people that die of flooding or drowning in deserts than they do of heat stroke, for instance. Because what happens is you're in the gully, the wadi, people do a lot of activities like rock climbing in these areas. It rains up further away, and a flash flood comes, and I get flash flood, and I drowned, versus if I was actually just didn't have any water. So if any of this water that doesn't catch ends up into what is called a salt pan, it goes into an area, it sits, it evaporates, the salts are left, and then nothing grows there. So this gives us a high rate of evapotranspiration. This reduces the yields that are possible in these areas. The weeds then typically grow more vigorously because we understand that weeds grow in poor soil conditions. So you have lots of weeds. And they compete for moisture. So then even if you try to do other plants, the weeds will outcompete your plants and take that poor moisture that's available. So they give low organic levels. So when we go here and we look at the soil, it's just sand. There's not any humic material, very low organic levels. We see gullies form because of the overland water flow, flash floods. They cut the land, and we see this erosionary events. And then in the desert, we find lots of burrowing animals, and they typically like to eat roots. So even if you do grow plants, then the animal would come to eat the roots of your plant. And they burrow to get away from the sun and have moisture. These soils are classified with high alkalinity and salinity, and they have mineral deficiencies. So when we try to grow plants, even if we do get the plant to grow sometimes, but we eat it, we don't have the minerals in the plant. And they're considered a fragile ecosystem, which needs basically careful management. So when we go into these areas and we try to do till agriculture or broad-scale monoculture systems, they tend to degrade the land, and then over a period of time, this is where we're experiencing what's called desertification. So in these areas, we see the deserts growing. So why does this matter? Why should we spend so much time on drylands? Well, if we want to meet the growing food demand, so we have an increasing population around the world, and that population happens to be increasing very rapidly, or the most in these particular areas, we need to rely more on drylands. And currently, 41% of our world is covered in dry lands. So to provide solutions for poverty, famine, malnutrition, and even warfare as an outcome of those. 80% of what's classified as the world's poor, okay, the bottom 2 billion, live in dry lands. And they're living in conditions right now that are going through desertification. So our deserts are actually growing. So you could almost say there's a worldwide war taking place in what we can say Africa, trying to stop the Gobi Desert, and also in China. Both of those, they actually have things you can look on the internet called the Great Green Belt. So they're trying to put trees across to stop desertification because the deserts are moving south. And if that happens, you're going to see more poor in those places due to loss of habitat and food. So strategies that we can employ, we want to retain precipitation on the land as long as possible. So you slow down the overland water flow so that you can use swales. One interesting technique that people will use in a desert situation is they'll just find rocks and they'll stack rocks in a line. So when the water is sheeting across the desert, it hits the rocks and slows it down to slow down the, so they'll put grids of just rock lines. You can reduce evaporation through mulch or any type of shading, as we discussed with like acacia trees. We can increase the input of water into aquifers, soils, and streams. Again, our swaling, slowing down the overland water flow, has time to soak in instead of accumulating in a salt pan. And we can use drought-tolerant plants or species or appropriate crops. So crops that can grow or tolerate low water conditions or high salinity. If we do this, we can look at areas like with the Great Green Belts that they're doing now, reforestation, trying to use forests to stop the desert's movement. We can use ground covers, reverse, and if we do this in an organized manner, we can reverse desertification. So I'm going to share something with you guys. What I think is the best video on permaculture on the internet ever made. It's called Green Gold. It's a video about a project in China, right? So they went there and they had a real problem, big valley, and they had ghosts. It's a desert. People are not able to have a living anymore. So the government went in and they said, hey, look, we're going to work with you. So call them Chinese permaculturalists. And they said, look, let's control the animals, let's replant the things, let's terrace this hillside. And in a period of 3 years, when you see the pictures of how it changed, from being able to control water, reintroducing species, and controlling the animals, it went literally from a picture of a desert. It's unbelievable. There's nothing. There's no trees. And it looks like a paradise. You swear you were looking at a picture of Bali or something. So you go from a desert to Bali, a span of 3 years with right techniques. So these things work. So check that out. It's on YouTube, Green Gold. So we can use ground covers. We can reduce salinity, which is a big problem for plants growing. That's when the water evaporates, the salts are left, and then the plants can't grow too much salt. And if we do all of those things in combination, we're going to look at, we can regenerate ecosystems.